have. And so there's all this opportunity for surveillance, and I think that's a problem. So why is that a problem? I think it's worth just sort of framing it and making sure that it's clear why do we object to surveillance in the first place. So people will tell you that it's creepy, and it's creepy. People will tell you that there's inherent human dignity and that we have human rights to privacy, and I would agree with those things too. But I think those are not sufficient arguments. Or maybe they're sufficient, but I think there are still more arguments that we can make for why surveillance is a real problem. And in particular, it's worth remembering that surveillance is it's a tool for social control and a tool for power. And you don't have to believe me that it's a tool for power. This logo here is the logo of the Office of Information Awareness, which they canceled, but they did all the programs anyway. Right? And it says here, their little motto is knowledge is power. And we've got the all-seeing eye creepily peering over the globe. So when I'm talking about anti-surveillance stuff, I'm doing it because I'm concerned about social control and power. I'm also concerned about the creepiness and the human rights issues. But I think it's worth focusing on the power and what can we do about it. So the folks who like to do surveillance like to break it out into two broad categories, right? They say, well, there's content and then there's metadata. So I want to sort of explore that a little bit. So content is the usual things that you might think of with somebody with their headphones on listening to the conversation or reading your web page traffic as it goes by. It's what are you saying? It's what kind of plans do you have? It's what's in your diary if you're writing your diary. That's all the content stuff. The metadata is almost everything else. So it's all kinds of little details, right? Like when do you talk? Who are you talking to? From where are you talking? Like what time did you write in your diary? Not what did you write, but what time did you write? And how long was the thing that you wrote in the diary? So there's all of these different pieces of information that are not content that still give you some information. And so I wanted to just point out here with this diagram here. This diagram is a great visualization. I can give you a pointer to it if you want it later, of philosophers. Right, so the different philosophers who worked with each other or cited each other are linked to each other, and you can tell just from the linkages who they worked with and when they worked with it, how often they worked with, you can tell which ones are the really important philosophers. And I want to point out here that you've got Kant and you've got Marx and you've got Hegel, and those folks show up as centralized nodes here, and you can figure that out even without understanding any of the philosophy involved. The philosophy is the content, the relationships here are the metadata. So if we want to oppose surveillance, generally with communications on networks today, we're going to use some kinds of crypto, and we want to use crypto that supports, that provides confidentiality and privacy. So confidentiality is when you're protecting your content, and privacy is roughly when you're protecting your metadata. Now, there's also other terms people will use that you'll hear. I'm using the terms confidentiality and privacy in this form here. And these things are relevant, confidentiality and privacy, in protocol design, if you're designing how the actual communications work, in software configurations, in user interface. All of these things are places where we need to be thinking about confidentiality and privacy. So still on the sort of social level, which do you think has more value to someone who wants to use surveillance for social control? Content or metadata? So I would argue that content is actually, the interpretation of content is sort of a fuzzy thing, and it can be a difficult task. It can require humans to, whereas metadata is sort of automatically in these discrete machine parsable chunks. So you can get metadata and you can process it at scale if you're a big surveillance engine who's interested in social control. So on the one hand, yes, you can do some machine learning that kind of understands the human content, but really all of the metadata, you can do these automated analyses really fast. Imagine trying to write something to understand the content of all of those philosophers, as opposed to just understanding the relationships between them, which you can quantify discretely. So what does metadata at scale give you if you're a surveillance regime? Well, who's the linchpin of the social graph, right? Oh, we know that this Marx guy seems to have influenced a lot of philosophers. If you decide one particular person is a bad guy, you can figure out who's related to them and generate some new targets for yourself. You can figure out who's been in a certain place at a certain time. This image here is a photograph from the New York Times of a protester, of someone's cell phone in Kiev, they got everybody who was at this one place got a text message that says, I believe the Times translates it as, "Dear subscriber, you are registered as a participant in a mass disturbance." Right? So there's no content evaluation there at all. This is all just metadata. And there's also very interesting patterns you can pull from metadata. And I recommend these papers that I'm pointing to up here. There's a Metaphone from the Stanford Security Labs where they had people install an app that sent all of their telephony metadata to Stanford rather than just to the cell phone providers and the government. And then Stanford combed through it to try to figure out what you could get from it. Very